March 23rd, 1945, 10:47 a.m. Winston Churchill sat aboard his command aircraft, only minutes from landing in Germany, prepared to witness what he believed would be a defining moment of British triumph. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's Operation Plunder, the carefully orchestrated Rhine crossing, was meant to prove to the world that British forces remained the most disciplined and professional arm of the Allied coalition. Then the radio came alive, for words followed that seemed to stop Churchill's heart. Patton crossed last night. Not today. Not under Montgomery's thunder of 1,000 guns. Not with airborne drops and weeks of preparation. But the night before, using little more than assault boats and what Patton would later describe as a band of angry Pennsylvanians. Montgomery's response reached Churchill almost immediately. It was brutally concise, just 2 sentences. American insubordination has made a mockery of Allied planning. Patton must be relieved of command at once. What Churchill said next, first in reply to Montgomery, then to his closest advisers, and finally in a quiet admission to his physician, would expose the harsh realities of coalition warfare. The cost of pride, the fragility of alliances, and why wars are often won by those who value results over procedure. To grasp the impossibility of Churchill's position, one must understand what Montgomery had been promised. January 12, 1945. Churchill had personally assured Montgomery that Operation Plunder would stand as the centerpiece of Allied victory in Europe. Not American improvisation, but British professionalism on full display. Montgomery spent 2 months preparing, 1.2 million men, 25,000 vehicles, 3,500 artillery pieces, airborne landings, smoke screens, and the largest river crossing since Normandy. Churchill had invited war correspondents. He arranged photographers. He personally drafted the communique praising British military excellence, ready for release the moment Montgomery's troops secured the eastern bank of the Rhine. Everything was prepared, except George Patton had his own plan. March 22nd, 10:37 p.m. Patton phoned Eisenhower from Luxembourg. Ike, quick update. 3rd Army crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim. Use assault boats. Minimal casualties. Thought you want to know. Eisenhower's response, preserved in the SHAF telephone log, showed that he instantly grasped the political disaster unfolding. George, please tell me you coordinated this with Montgomery. Patton's reply was vintage Patton. Monty's got his crossing tomorrow. Didn't want to bother him with details. Eisenhower ended the call and immediately summoned his chief of staff. Get me Churchill. George just created the biggest diplomatic crisis of the war. March 23rd, 6:18 a.m. Montgomery received confirmation that American forces had crossed the Rhine 12 hours before Operation Plunder was scheduled to begin. Multiple staff officers later described his reaction. He did not shout. He went cold. Patton has deliberately sabotaged Allied strategy to satisfy his ego. This is insubordination at the strategic level. I want him relieved, court-martialed, and sent home today. His chief of staff attempted to soften the moment. Sir, the crossing was successful. 3rd Army is expanding the bridgehead. Montgomery cut him off. Success is irrelevant. Discipline is paramount. If Patton is allowed to ignore command authority, we have chaos, not a coalition. He immediately drafted a message to Churchill. An American general has conducted an unauthorized operation in violation of the agreed strategic framework. I request that you demand Eisenhower relieve Patton immediately. British forces cannot operate alongside commanders who disregard the chain of command. Churchill received the message at 9:15 a.m., just minutes before his aircraft was due to land. His military secretary watched him read it 3 times. Ismay, Churchill asked quietly, what are the facts? Sir, Patton crossed at Oppenheim last night. Fewer than 30 casualties. The bridgehead is secure. He did it without elaborate preparation, without Montgomery's permission, without anyone's permission. Churchill stared out the aircraft window at the German countryside below. Montgomery was his chosen general, his protege, the embodiment of careful planning and professional warfare. Yet Patton had crossed Hitler's last natural barrier before Montgomery could even begin. The political equation was unforgiving. Support Montgomery, and Churchill would be demanding the dismissal of an American general for achieving success too quickly. Support Patton, and he would publicly diminish British military prestige before the world. The aircraft touched down at 10:52 a.m. Montgomery stood waiting on the tarmac, rigid and immaculate. Churchill descended the stairs. Montgomery saluted. "Prime Minister, thank you for coming to witness Operation Plunder." Churchill replied evenly, "Field Marshal, I receive your message. Walk with me." They moved away from the assembled staff. Montgomery began at once. "Prime Minister, I must insist that Patton be relieved. His insubordination cannot be tolerated." Churchill raised a hand. "Bernard, answer one question, honestly. If Patton had asked permission to cross at Oppenheim last night, what would you have said?" Montgomery did not hesitate. "I would have denied it. His crossing distracts from the main effort." "Your main effort," Churchill replied quietly. "The Allied main effort, as defined by planners who gave you 2 months and gave Patton nothing." Churchill stopped walking. "Bernard, is this truly about strategy or is it about pride?" Montgomery's face reddened, but his voice remained firm. "Prime Minister, it is about maintaining command discipline." Churchill's reply was quiet, but it struck with devastating force. "This isn't about Patton embarrassing you," he said evenly. "It's about Patton making you look slow." The words lingered in the cold German air. Montgomery started to answer, but Churchill pressed on. "Bernard, I've defended your methods for 3 years. Careful preparation, overwhelming force, minimal casualties. That is the British way, and it has saved tens of thousands of lives. But watching Patton cross the Rhine with assault boats while you required 2 months to plan the same operation forces me to confront some very uncomfortable questions." Montgomery's voice tightened. "Prime Minister, if you're suggesting American methods are superior—" "I'm suggesting," Churchill interrupted, "that American speed is now achieving results we can no longer match." He turned to face Montgomery directly. "The war is ending, Bernard. Germany is collapsing. Every day we spend refining plans is another day the Soviets push farther west. Patton understands that." Montgomery's reply carried a bitter edge. "So you're choosing him over me?" Churchill shook his head slowly. "I'm choosing to end this war before the Soviets decide the shape of post-war Europe, and that requires a tempo we no longer possess." What Montgomery did not know was that Churchill had been wrestling with this realization for months. In December 1944, after Patton relieved Bastogne in 72 hours, Churchill had written privately in his diary, "Patton does in days what takes us weeks." In January, watching Montgomery advance methodically while Patton surged across France, Churchill confided to his physician, "The Americans have learned to move faster than we can think." And now, standing on a German airfield, observing Montgomery's elaborate preparations, Churchill finally accepted the truth he had resisted. British military doctrine, the doctrine he had defended throughout the war, had been overtaken by American operational speed. Montgomery made one final appeal. "Prime Minister, if Patton is not disciplined, you establish a precedent that command authority means nothing." Churchill's reply became one of the bluntest assessments of Allied politics ever spoken aloud. "You're right, Bernard. Patton should be disciplined. He violated protocol. He ignored coordination. He made you and the British military establishment look foolish." He paused and continued, "But here is what you are not seeing. If I demand that Eisenhower fire Patton, the Americans will ask why. And I will have to explain that we dismissed their most successful general because he crossed the Rhine too quickly without British permission. Do you understand how that sounds?" Montgomery began to protest, but Churchill raised his voice slightly. "The Americans are supplying 70% of Allied forces. They are taking the majority of casualties. They are financing this war. And their general has just shown he can cross the Rhine in a single night with minimal preparation, while we require 2 months and 1,000,000 men to accomplish the same task. If I demand his removal, I am admitting that British pride matters more than Allied victory. The silence that followed was broken by distant thunder. Operation Plunder had begun. Montgomery's crossing, immaculately planned, was finally underway. But everyone present understood it was no longer the defining moment. Churchill placed a hand on Montgomery's shoulder. "Bernard, you are one of Britain's finest commanders. History will record your victories. But it will also record that when the final chapter of this war was written, an American general crossed the Rhine first. Not because he was better than you, but because he was willing to gamble everything on speed while we calculated caution." Montgomery's reply was barely audible. "So I've lost." Churchill shook his head. "We've all lost something. You've lost precedence. I've lost the illusion that British methods still define modern warfare. But we are winning the war. That must be enough." Churchill returned to his aircraft without watching the crossing. According to his military secretary, the Prime Minister sat in complete silence for 20 minutes. Then he asked for dictation. The message was addressed to General Eisenhower. "General, I have received Field Marshal Montgomery's request that General Patton be relieved for conducting an unauthorized Rhine crossing. After careful consideration, I cannot support this request. General Patton's operation, while uncoordinated, was successful and advances Allied objectives. I recommend no action be taken." Churchill paused before signing. Then he added a handwritten postscript. "Ike, keep Patton moving. We cannot match his speed, but we cannot afford to lose it." That evening, Churchill met privately with his physician, Lord Moran. Moran's diary preserves the only record of what Churchill said when he believed no one of consequence was listening. The Prime Minister looked exhausted. He poured himself a whiskey. "I have just chosen American results over British pride," he said. "Montgomery will never forgive me. The military establishment will be furious. But watching Patton cross that river while we prepared our elaborate spectacle forced me to face something terrible. We are no longer the leading military power in this alliance. We haven't been for some time. I was simply too proud to admit it." Moran asked if Churchill regretted the decision. "Not for a second," Churchill replied. "Pride does not win wars. Speed does. Patton understands that. Montgomery does not. And if I must choose between a general who preserves British prestige and one who ends this war faster, I will choose the man who brings our boys home." He paused, then added quietly, "And that is what makes this moment truly dangerous." Bernard demanded Patton be dismissed for insubordination. And in one sense, Montgomery was right. Patton had ignored the chain of command. He had violated protocol. In any properly functioning military, his actions would have brought immediate consequences. But that, Churchill understood, was precisely the point. They were no longer operating within a properly run national army. They were commanding a coalition of competing national interests, one in which power flowed not from tradition or seniority, but from resources. And the nation with the greatest resources was no longer Britain. It was the United States. Lord Moran recorded Churchill's next words verbatim. "I have spent this entire war pretending we were equal partners with the Americans. Today, I finally admitted the truth. They are the senior partner now. They provide the majority of the men, the material, and increasingly, the leadership." Patton crossed first not because he was better trained or braver, but because American military doctrine has surpassed ours. Not in discipline, not in courage, but in its willingness to move faster than caution recommends. "That," Churchill said, "is the future of warfare, and we are no longer leading it." The consequences of that realization spread quickly through Allied command. Montgomery never forgave him. Their relationship, once marked by trust and warmth, hardened into something strictly professional and deeply strained. Within the British military establishment, resentment simmered. The chiefs of staff submitted a formal protest. warning that failure to discipline Patton undermined the very foundation of command authority. Churchill's reply was characteristically blunt. "Would you prefer that I demand his dismissal and watch the Americans ignore me? That would damage British authority far more than this quiet acceptance." But the decision carried implications far beyond wounded pride. By refusing to support Montgomery's demand, Churchill sent a clear signal to American commanders. Operational success would be tolerated, even rewarded, when it delivered results, regardless of protocol. Patton grasped this immediately. After learning that Churchill had declined Montgomery's request, he wrote in his diary, "The British finally understand this is our war now. We'll finish it our way." Years later, Churchill offered his final assessment in his memoirs. In the 6th volume of his History of the War, he devoted an entire chapter to the Rhine crossings. "General Patton's crossing at Oppenheim," he wrote, "demonstrated that modern warfare rewards speed over preparation. Field Marshal Montgomery's operation, Plunder, was a masterpiece of careful planning. Yet Patton's improvised assault achieved the same objective in a single night, with a fraction of the resources. The contrast," Churchill admitted, "was instructive, and for those of us who champion British methods, deeply uncomfortable." In private correspondence, he was even more candid. In a 1953 letter to President Eisenhower, Churchill wrote, "You once asked me whether I regretted not supporting Montgomery's demand to dismiss Patton. The answer is no. Patton won the race to the Rhine. He helped end the war sooner. He saved lives by moving too quickly for the Germans to organize a coherent defense. Was he insubordinate? Absolutely. Was he necessary? More than I wish to admit." What Churchill said when Montgomery demanded Patton's dismissal revealed the hardest truth of coalition warfare. Sometimes the choice is not between right and wrong, but between the general who makes you proud and the general who wins faster. Churchill chose speed. He chose results. And he chose to acknowledge that British military methods, however professional, however honorable, had been overtaken by American operational tempo. In doing so, he confronted a reality Britain had avoided since 1942. The empire that once defined military excellence was no longer setting the standard. It was struggling to keep up. Montgomery wanted Patton punished for breaking the rules. Churchill understood that Patton had exposed something far more dangerous. In modern war, the side that moves fastest wins. And Britain could no longer move fast enough.